we should be able to achieve a resolution that respects the rights of the Iranian people while giving the world confidence that the Iranian program is peaceful. But to succeed, conciliatory words will have to be matched by actions that are transparent and verifiable.
When U.S. President Barack Obama addressed the UN General Assembly earlier today, he signaled that his administration is willing to engage in direct diplomacy with Iran. But as you just heard, success will depend on Iranian action. Just over an hour ago, then, we heard from Iran's new president, Hassan Rouhani, who took a more conciliatory approach, we should say, than the last president. He says Iran is open to negotiations on its nuclear program under certain conditions. How far is this new and seemingly progressive president willing to go? Is this just a ploy, or can Iran be trusted? Joining me now in Toronto to discuss the reaction is Director of the Munk School of Global Affairs, Janice Stein, and in Washington, the Executive Director of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, Mark Dubowitz. Dubowitz and Stein, always good to have that combination back. Let's talk first about the Canadian reaction from Janice Stein. Stephen Harper didn't attend the session and said, we'll wait for actions instead of words. What do you make of the response to Rouhani?
I thought it was fairly expected, Evan. You know, the Prime Minister has been skeptical, careful, and cautious. And I think actually the speech that he heard today justified that caution. He's right, I think, to emphasize that this is an early stage in this process, and that the proof of the pudding is what's going to be on the negotiating table, away from the glare of the headlights as this moves forward.
Mark Dubowitz, you've got Barack Obama saying he's willing to at least engage Iran, Canada not. Who's being prudent and who's not?
Well, I think President Obama actually was really trying to make President Rouhani his new BFF. He reached out. He wanted to meet him in New York. He certainly gave a speech, President Obama did this morning, which was full of moderate pieties and a willingness to engage with the new Iranian president, and Rouhani blew it. He completely blew it with that speech. He spent his time talking about perceived American crimes. He took no responsibility for Iran's brutal murder of Syrian women and children, of Iranian dissidents, of a history of terrorism. And I think he actually, that speech by Rouhani was designed to appeal to hardliners back in Tehran, not to give President Obama the political space from domestic critics to actually reach a compromise agreement.
Do you think it's right that Obama should at least ask John Kerry to try to engage with Rouhani?
Listen, I think there's nothing wrong with trying to engage with this Iranian regime. America has been trying to engage with Iranian leaders for decades, and I think we should always try and test diplomacy and see if this is a regime that's willing to compromise. And I think President Obama will once again find, as he has over the past number of years, that this regime is not actually interested in a negotiated settlement. And I think the speech by Rouhani, which frankly surprised me, Evan, it was a shock to me that Rouhani would have taken this opportunity to not have engaged the American people and to undercut Obama's domestic critics. I think it doesn't portend well for future negotiations.
Janice.
You know, I'm a little more charitable, and let me just clarify.
You're always more charitable, Janice.
I'm always more charitable. But I don't think that our Prime Minister has made a decision not to engage. I think what he said is we need to be careful and we need to look for the deeds. There's probably not a lot of daylight right now actually between Obama and Harper as far as that's concerned. Now, I actually think Obama is right to explore. We have to be cautious. We have to be skeptical. But Rouhani had two groups of people that were paying attention to this. He had the hardliners back home, and he had the television audience that was listening to the speech in New York. He shored up his flank at home, but they have made the decision now to have the highest level personal contact between Kerry and the Iranian foreign ministers that we've had in over 30 years, really since 1979. that is a step forward, but the proof of the pudding, as our Prime Minister said today, is going to be in the eating. There is a deal to be had here. The question is there political will to get to that deal?
Janice, I actually disagree. I actually don't think there's a deal to be had for this fundamental reason, and that is that President Rouhani once again reiterated the Iranian hardline position, which is they will absolutely not compromise on their so-called right to enrichment, to having domestic enrichment on Iranian soil. And I think that is absolutely a non-starter for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And I also think that it actually is very much consistent with Iran's overall strategic objective, which is to keep pursuing an industrial-sized nuclear program with undetectable nuclear breakout and the ability to produce nuclear fuel on Iranian soil. He had an opportunity today to actually provide President Obama with some political space to find a compromise. He blew that opportunity, and I think he's going to find that President Obama's both Democratic and Republican base in terms of Congress is going to be furious today after hearing a Rouhani speech blaming America for all the problems of the world.
On the right to enrichment, which he certainly reiterated today, it's the right to enrichment is not really the issue. The issue is how much and at what level. And that's where the negotiations, if they're going to go anywhere, will actually go. So this is the opening piece of theater we're seeing today. And Rouhani did make a call. He made a call to satisfy, to shore up his own domestic.
I think we just lost Janice Stein there. Hang on there. I'm going to go back to Mark Dubowitz because we'll get Janice back as soon as we can. What do we make, Mark, about the Iranian release of political prisoners today, including Canadian Hamid Ghashami Shal, who's been held since 2008? Is that some kind of signal?
Well, listen, I think it is, but I think it's more a signal to Rouhani's domestic constituency. I mean, the Iranian people have been suffering for years from political repression, from a cratering economy, and Rouhani is only there because the Iranian people have spoken. They've had enough of the domestic repression. They've had enough of a nuclear policy that has led to sanctions and economic collapse. And I think that he's signaling to his own domestic constituency that he's going to try and relieve some of that domestic pressure. I think the international community should welcome the release of these prisoners, should insist on the release of the hundreds more that are languishing in Evin prison, and we should keep insisting that President Rouhani make a serious commitment to a negotiated settlement where the right to enrichment is the key issue. I disagree with Janice, and I don't want to be disagreeing when she's not there.
Well, guess what? She's back.
This is the issue.
All right, Janice, we've got you back. So now
Right.
you can disagree with full freedom. Go ahead, Janice.
No, I actually do think that there is. I don't agree with Mark here. I think there is room. The right to enrichment is not going to be the make it or break it part of this deal. It's the transparency of the enrichment. It's can they account for the enriched uranium? Can it be inspected? And at what level do they enrich? If they enrich, for example, at 5%, Rouhani can walk away and say to the Iranian people, we have the right to enrich, and nobody, including President Obama, and even Prime Minister Netanyahu, will worry about that.
Well, actually,
But we're
Janice, that's
just
completely not the
far
case.
away.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it very clear in the past week that
I think
Iran
it's
must
rhetoric.
end. Well,
I think that's rhetoric, Mark. I think
Janice,
that's just rhetoric before they get to the table. And, the interesting thing about this, of course, is these negotiations have to unroll, and we will see in the next 3 or 4 months whether, in fact, the deadlock is real or it's apparent. But it's right to test the waters, as Obama is doing.
All right, can I
Nothing
show this
wrong with
picture?
testing.
Let me show this picture of French President François Hollande. He's shaking hands with Rouhani.
Yes,
here.
he is.
All right. I mean, now you've got the UK engaging. They were there. You've got the United States engaging. You got France going this step. And Mark Dubowitz, what about Canada's role? Should Stephen Harper engage or at least try to do some kind of engagement?
Look, Evan, everybody's engaging. I mean, at the end of the day, this is not about whether you shake hands or you actually sit across the table. This is about continuing to insist on accountable actions, international compliance, and an Iranian regime that cannot be trusted with domestic enrichment or any kind of nuclear capability that could produce nuclear weapons. I mean, again, I completely disagree with Janice. This is a fundamental issue. Benjamin Netanyahu is not engaging in this based on political rhetoric. President Rouhani has said today that they have not pursued nuclear weapons in the past and have no intention of pursuing this in the future. This is a complete bold-faced lie. The International Atomic Energy Agency has made it very clear, time and time again, that Iran is engaged in nuclear weaponization activities. So if President Rouhani wants to maintain this fiction, then I think it's absolutely right that Prime Minister Harper, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and others continue to refuse to actually engage a president who is a master of nuclear deceit.
All right, Janice, I got 10 seconds. Can Rouhani be trusted on the nuclear issue?
I don't think the issue is trust, Evan. I think the issue is you don't negotiate with your friends, but you do with your adversaries. There has to be some really tough negotiation here, backed up by really intrusive inspection. That's the name of this game.
Which always depend on trust.
The
No,
famous
you do not.
Stein-Dubowitz combination, once again, that we have come to welcome every week when we try to tackle these issues. Janice Stein, Mark Dubowitz, thanks so much for your time as always.
Thanks,
You're
Janice.
welcome.
Thanks, Evan.
Bye, Mark.
All right,
Bye, Janice.
speaking